And our next guest will speak about the growing crisis of loneliness and the role. Our next guest will speak about the growing crisis of loneliness and the role creativity can play in fostering healing, belonging, and connection. Drawing on his work in public health, medicine, and creative expression, he will explore how loneliness affects individual and community well-being and how creativity can serve as a powerful pathway toward healing and connection. Through insights from his research, advocacy, and leadership of the Project UnLonely, he will highlight the role of the arts in addressing disconnection and supporting health in meaningful, human-centered ways. A longtime faculty member of the Harvard Medical School and the Harvard T.H. School of Public Health, as well as an award-winning poet, please join me in welcoming Dr. Jeremy Nobel up to the podium.
Thanks, Lee, and thanks to the Maine Arts Commission. Thanks to all of you for being here. I realize I'm batting cleanup here on a very, very full afternoon. And so I'll do the best I can to keep you, at very least, entertained, if not informed, about what's going on with the loneliness crisis. And I'm going to go past that a little bit to talk about what the arts do to address loneliness, foster a sense of connection. I think we're all experiencing that this afternoon. I know our work table is. And I'll talk a little bit about the work we're doing through the nonprofit I work with, the Foundation for Art and Healing and Project UnLonely. And that should kind of round it out. And then we'll have some time for some questions. So let's see if the forward button works. Okay, that's good. That's the title slide for my talk. Let's see what we'll cover today. Loneliness as a growing public health crisis. How you can leverage creative arts. Hang on just a second. Leveraging creative arts to address loneliness and foster connection. Yes, let's see, can we move it this way? Okay, tech support.
I see you clicking all kinds of things here. Hopefully. There we go.
So this one?
This one.
That's what I thought. Okay, here we go.
Sometimes this little arrow with it.
It's all about where the little arrow is. Okay. And I'm going to end with some opportunities for immediate action. But first, hello, who is this guy? So, Lee, thanks for the very generous introduction. This is what's on my CV. Except I usually don't include poet or image maker, but that's a big part of my enjoyment of the work I do. But you might be asking, who is this guy really? So I get up way too early. I'm a lifetime worrier. I'm sometimes lonely. I love coffee and bike riding. And I'm not always as caring and compassionate as I'd like to be. So this is photo documentation of that. This is the universal medical gesture for caring and compassion. But don't blame me, the AIDS crisis was going on. So it was a tough time. So we are going to talk a little bit about loneliness, and we're going to start by some polling, right? So these are questions. Yes, I'll say, if you agree, raise your hand. Here's the first question. In the last year, has someone you know been often or very lonely? So it could be you, but someone else. Okay, hands if yes is the answer. That's pretty close to 100%. Okay. Next question. In the last year, has anyone said out loud to you, I feel lonely? Okay, so a lot, but about 60%. And I asked this is not as rigorous as Marcel would like as survey research, but that's about what's going on. So obviously, if everybody knows someone who's lonely, why aren't we hearing it? There's some stigma. People don't want to talk about it. I'll get back to that in a minute. And then question 3, do you think loneliness is more of an issue now than it was in March 2020, which is when the World Health Organization declared COVID worse now than in 2020? I agree. And there's evidence that it is. So we can't say, oh, well, COVID's in the rearview mirror. It's not exactly in the rearview mirror, but, the crisis is past. We're not isolating. Let's get on, worry about other things. Loneliness is worse now. I love this cartoon kind of captures my sense of it. My desire to be well informed is currently at odds with my desire to remain sane. So six years after COVID, loneliness challenge is accelerating. A big driver for that is uncertainty. It drives our brains crazy, actually, uncertainty. If our brains could have their way, tomorrow would look exactly like today. Why is that? We survived today. And the brain's job is to keep us alive. So it doesn't want the circumstances changing very much. It gets very anxious. And we're seeing that. And also just the circumstances many are struggling with, in all seriousness, are dramatically challenging. And it's not just one thing. It's the cost of just living, geopolitical crises that are putting a lot of things uncertain, not just the price of gas, but the future of the planet, community violence, climate trauma, fear and distrust of our neighbors. These are things that feel different and worse and uncertain. That's driving it all. And so as a result, stress and burnout have become much higher, not just in the US, but globally. I can imagine some of you think, any good news? Well, is this the way? Amy, what are you doing here? And I think there is good news. The good news is we're starting to talk about loneliness and isolation. Our Surgeon General, former Surgeon General Vivek Murthy, kicked it off in this advisory report that came out 2023, so just about 3 years ago, really trying to get people to understand what loneliness is, and then respond to it as a real public health crisis. I wrote a book on loneliness, came out later in 2023. It has 3 goals. First is to demystify and humanize loneliness so we can better understand it. The second is to provide some useful observations about what seems to work in terms of interventional programming, and then particularly to look at creative expression as a modality that has increasingly compelling scientific evidence behind it. And my hope, and Project UnLonely is the name of the initiative for our nonprofit foundation, but and we do use some case studies and so on, but the real goal and the hope of my book is that individuals and organizations design their own project on lonelies, because it's really within all of our capabilities to do that for ourselves, for our families, and think with some imagination. But it starts with, what is loneliness? So it's not the same as being alone. Loneliness is a subjective feeling. It's actually an emotion, also a brain state. And it's the gap between the social connections you want to have, what you desire, maybe even what you dream about, and what you actually think you experience. And what surprises a lot of people is that gap, even though it's a brain state, has some devastating health consequences. So I think what are best known are the mental health consequences, right? So loneliness is probably the biggest preventable risk factor for this classic triad of mental health challenges: depression, anxiety, addiction, and suicidality. But really compelling evidence started coming out about 15 or 20 years ago that loneliness won't just make you miserable, it'll kill you. It increases risk of heart attack, stroke, or death from either by 30%, increases risk of dementia by 40%, diabetes by 50%. And as you'll see, part of the frustration is a lot of it is avoidable. So those are all the illness challenges, but there's more to health than illness. So this is the World Health Organization charter, right? That health is more than the absence of illness. It's the full achievement of physical, mental, and social potential. And so thriving and flourishing, the things that make life worth living, if you will, these get constrained in loneliness too. It's incredibly celebratory for many people just to have the joy of connecting with others. And if we can't do that or can't imagine doing that, life becomes diminished. And I think that's as important for us to be approaching as illness rates. And I'm a public health practitioner. Of course, I care about cardiovascular disease rates, but we have to also imagine the benefits being much larger than that and measure them. So there are 2 groups at particular loneliness risk for chronic loneliness: spiraling. And let me talk about spiraling. So many people feel that, oh my gosh, I hear loneliness is terrible. Here's the thing. Here's the reality. Everybody is lonely from time to time. The occasional twinge of loneliness that you want more human connection may be the most human of feelings, that you want to connect with people. That is not the health problem. The health problem happens because loneliness as a brain state also changes how we make sense of the world and makes the world look more threatening. So if you see the world is threatening, do you lean into it or back away? You back away. What happens to your brain? Does it get lonelier or less lonely? It gets lonelier, and then it sees the world as more threatening. You start backing away more. At some point, you also start changing your behavior because you see the world as threatening, you're lonely, and maybe you're not so friendly to people and so on, and maybe you act a little bit standoffish. Then they say, oh, Jeremy really wants to be left alone. I'm really going to give him some space. What happens to Jeremy's brain? Lonelier or less lonely? Exactly. And so then Jeremy's behavior might go from just being, a little bit rude to maybe hostile. Then they really want to leave this guy alone. And this is spiraling, right? And we see a lot of examples. Those of you who are doing clinical work, I know it's spiraling, and it happens in depression also. So I think the real opportunity here is to understand spiraling, identify it early, and intervene. And as I'll share with you, the arts have a very powerful way to do that. Because it doesn't take a lot to just get someone to see the world as a little kinder, a little more gentle, a little more worth having conversations with someone they don't know. That makes their brain a little less lonely. They see the world as a little less threatening, and it moves the spiral in the other direction. So that's what I think we all should be looking at in terms of the public health intervention. I'll talk more about that. But just let me sum it up, what's going on with loneliness in the community. So first of all, obviously, it's a diverse group of individuals and circumstances. It's a relatively short talk today, so I'm not going to all the types of loneliness, of which there are 3. See, if you're curious, get the book. And a set of complex overlapping drivers that reinforce loneliness or undermine people's confidence that they know how to navigate it. And consequently, there is no silver bullet. But there are things we can do. And what I'm going to focus on for the rest of this talk is really how the arts and creativity and imagination can be helpful. And I'm going to start with imagination, which is how do we imagine a different way of thinking about loneliness? So many people think of loneliness as a sign of inadequacy. I'm lonely because there's something wrong with me. It's my fault. This is an incredible injustice that people do to themselves. If loneliness did arise from the need to connect with other people to have better survival back in, cave dwelling days, then it's a biologic signal. Our brains produce this sense of we want connection. Well, what's thirst? Thirst is a biologic signal that we need hydration to survive. Loneliness is a biologic signal we need other people to survive. I rarely meet people who are guilty and ashamed about being thirsty. Why are we guilty and ashamed about being lonely? And the answer is it's a cultural construction. The myths and stories we have and kind of how we navigate things lead us to have that idea. The only good news about that is that anything that is culturally constructed can be culturally reconstructed. And that's what arts do very effectively. They literally can change how we make sense of the world and our navigation of it. So if loneliness is the signal that we need human connection, how do we achieve that? How do we go from being lonely to being connected or unlonely? So here's what no one in this room is going to think is a new idea, because as I think Naj pointed out, it's been going on for thousands of years. There never has been a culture with any kind of recorded history, including the cultures that had cave paintings, where arts are not part of that culture. Visual art, music, movement, language arts, even spoken before there was ways to write it down. So maybe art and the thoughts and feelings and the storytelling that it offers connects us. And maybe it's that connection that helps us survive. And I think that's important for people advocating for arts and health. not only to know intellectually, but to feel comfortable sharing with other people and not just saying it, but showing it in the creative work. How many creative makers in this room? I bet they're like, right, exactly the same number who were lonely. No. So the arts, very powerful way to do four things. Engage attention, right? We all know you hear a piece of music or you see a painting, you can't get it out of your head. So that's particularly important at a time when everyone's fighting for our attention, everything from social media to other things, right? So the arts literally put you in the moment in a way that fewer and fewer things do in our daily lives. That's a characteristic worth taking advantage of. Also, the arts inspire you. So what is inspiration? It's a kind of motivation, but it's very specific. You don't say, I'm inspired to clean my closet unless you're trying to make a joke, right? It's an inspiration. It's usually attached to something bigger. Like I want to make the planet a better place. I want to see more green space. I want people to be less afraid. These are things you can be inspired to do. The other things the arts do is they somehow empower us to imagine we can produce that great thing. So inspiration and empowerment, I think, are really incredibly linked in a very positive way. And then the fourth thing is connection. We're going to talk more about that, but and how that works. But it starts with what the arts really do to our brain. And it literally rewires. And the science is getting unbelievably better than it was 22 years ago when it was before functional MRI started. And we were trying to imagine how the arts could improve health and well-being. I started the foundation after 9/11 when I just observed how many people turned to the arts as a way to make sense of their emotional reactions, including kids. And these were very powerful images. There was an art exhibit in the Museum of the City of New York the summer after 9/11. And I went to see this exhibit. The first thing I noticed was how powerful the art was. Now, it was what's called outsider art, primitive art, right? It didn't have formal things, but boy, emotional impact. And it turned out the art was produced because child life specialists were going out to the schools in the 5 boroughs because many of the kids were having acute trauma response. Mostly from watching those images of the planes go into the building over and over and over again. Adult brains filter that out, pediatric brains don't. And so they were just overwhelmed with this. And very simple exercises, draw what's on your mind and talk about it, was tremendously effective. And so I thought, okay, I reached out to the folks doing that work. I said, what else did you notice? They said, well, we noticed that it was effective as a technique across race and class. And as the therapists in the room know, you often modify therapeutic interventional therapies, emotional therapies, to adjust to culture like race and class. You didn't have to with the arts. It just went somewhere more powerful, really, and maybe earlier in the development of kind of emotional structures than race and class. So that was very interesting to me. And so I said, boy, I'm really going to study this. And I went to my Harvard colleagues. I said, let's study this. And they said, well, we don't have the techniques to study it. And I said, but we know it seems to be working. Why we can study it while we do the work in the community. And they said, no, you don't understand. It's not kind of how it works. Well, I did understand because I was from that world also, but I uttered some of the most ignorant words of my life. I'd say ignorant things fairly routinely, but this really took it. Some of you will relate to this. I said, why don't I start a nonprofit? How hard could that be? But anyway, so that was 22 years ago. We're doing a lot better now. There is better science. People are studying the brain really carefully around the arts. And a really great book just came out by Daisy Fancourt called The Art Cure. Got really well reviewed, just came out in February. I recommend that. It builds on a book called Your Brain on Art that Susan Mag-Salmon brought out in 2023. These are just tremendous beacons of light, really, and also how much more is to come. So that's a big part of the brain. And just to sum it up, the arts, when you both making and beholding art reduces the stress hormone levels of the levels of stress hormone cortisol, increases the levels of feel-good hormones, dopamine, serotonin, oxytocin. So at the very least, you're not stressed and you feel good. That's not a bad way to connect. But also, there are parts of the brain that literally determine how we make sense of social threat. So if you see somebody walking towards you and it's a strange city, whether you're conscious of it or not, your brain is saying, is that person a threat or an opportunity? Maybe they'll tell you the best place to eat in town, but you don't know. And so that's what our brains are doing all the time. So it turns out that you can map those regions of the brain. It's called the social connectome. This was done in 2019. And then a very enterprising, actually a fine arts photographer who got so into this. She went to University College London and got a PhD in neuroscience so she could study the impact of the arts on the brain regions. And the arts, particularly when you ask not formal questions like perception questions, like what color is that Mark Rothko painting? That's a different part of the brain. But if you ask what does it mean or how does it feel, that overlaps the same brain regions that make sense of how you look at the world. So this is the neurobiologic basis for empathy, for compassion, for the things that we'd like to see more of. So I go on, but that's kind of what's going on in the brain. But there's more to it. The arts also encourage us to tell stories. They're like little provocations. Either you see something and you want to, kind of express yourself a certain way. I mean, and certain arts are storytelling mediums. Poetry, my art form is, theater is. I think paintings often tell stories, even abstract paintings tell a story and how you react to it. Music, certainly. So that's fundamental to it. So think about storytelling as a way to connect. And the last is the arts are powerful at somehow connecting us to a bigger story than our own personal circumstance. Sometimes the brain state they evoke are called awe or wonder. And there's a lot of experiments done in those states that show that people are kinder, they're more generous to each other, and they're more connected. So this is all part of being part of a bigger story. Now, there are other things that could make us feel part of a bigger story than creative making. I'll just say, just so you know how big it is, being in nature increases that sense, that we're part of a bigger story. That's why anything we do to increase access to natural experiences is going to help the community be less lonely. The other thing that probably deserves its own, talk is serving other people. Kind of reminds us that we're part of a bigger tribe. And sometimes it's unconscious, but the results are measurable. And it changes brain rates, it changes stress levels, and so on. But we're going to stick with the arts. And so the arts really do have tremendous potential. The question is, how do we bring forward what we know about the arts? What many people in this room are active as teaching artists or expressive therapists. So art, and to lean on the philosopher that impacted me in college, Friedrich Nietzsche, we have art so that we may not die of reality. I thought he was being a comedian, actually. I thought he was just making a joke, but he actually was very serious because the arts change how we construct reality in our own thinking, in our own experience. So that's a kind of quick summary. There's a lot more in Daisy Fancourt's book and so on. I'm just going to, since time is relatively short, just do a quick flyover of the things we're up to at the foundation, also including some things we'll be doing in Maine that some of you may want to be involved in. So Project UnLonely started way before the pandemic. We started it around 2013, 2014. So whatever that is, 12 years. It's got 3 goals. First is to raise awareness about loneliness and how bad it is for all types of health. The second is to reduce the stigma that still surrounds it, in some cases even worse. And the third is to design, test, and make available arts-based programming to the community. So we're not a direct service organization. We're not like Doctors Without Borders or Planned Parenthood. We develop these programs and we make them available to a wide range of community-based organizations of the type many of you work with. So community centers, libraries, schools, older adult housing, faith-based groups, so it's across the gamut. And we have programs that fall into 3 categories. The first is kind of fun. These are short films we've been curating for 10 years. This is season 10's coming up, and they're all on topics of loneliness, belonging, connection. They're animated films, they're narrative films, they're documentaries, and we've worked with the makers of those films to have licensing rights to screen them for nonprofit, non-commercial activities and make them available to our collaborating partners to screen them. So you watch a film, you can watch it on your own. You can stream them from our site. If you're an individual, no charge, go look at a film, watch it with your family, have a conversation. But you can imagine, even in a setting like this, you could show some of these films, you could do some conversations about it, and so on. So the second activity are a growing number of just simple arts activations. Write a 6-word poem or do a certain kind of thumbprint kind of facial drawing. They're kind of fun things you can do. And the idea is to just make it playful and fun and accessible for people. So come enjoy those. They're on our site under the Creativity Hub is what we call those. And the third, which is what we're really best known for and focusing on, are our workshops. So, I can't really go into detail of all the workshops, but I will tell you that they all have a similar framework. They combine 3 modalities that you're all very aware of: mindfulness, creative making, and social sharing. But they do it in a way that's flexible enough that we could address a variety of challenges, whether it's aging related, young adult loneliness. We do a lot, in that world, caregiver loneliness, and so on. So again, just to reinforce it, we don't deliver these. We make the programs available, test them, and then we push them out towards community organizations who work as our collaborators, not just to deliver them, but help us measure their impact so that we could be continually improving them. Okay, so that's what we're doing in general. I want to talk a little bit about what we're doing in Maine and why I am so delighted to be here. So actually, we started doing our work. Maine was one of the states we started in part because of some relationships I had here and so on. So we've been fostering creativity and connection in Maine since 2019. Actually, we started a little bit earlier than that. We did a lot of work in aging. I'll talk about that, in campus age, loneliness, and then I will touch on what's next. So for aging across the lines, we, through some various partnerships, including the Maine Council on Aging, we did older adult programming across the state in a variety of settings because we wanted to make sure our programs could work in different settings. So we worked with Martins Point, with the town of Elliott, with the Bangor, Maine YMCA. They hit it out of the park. With Healthy Island Project, which is in Blue Hill. So, we were able to show that we had significant, improvements in how people made sense of their own loneliness, their sense of confidence, they could navigate their situation. Sometimes people call that resilience. But the most interesting thing was we changed actually how they increased their social activation. So 52% of people who took one of our programs took some other program that they hadn't planned on taking. So this is phenomenal to us. Great, go take more programs. So that was really, really good news. So we also were working on campus, again, through relationships with Bowdoin, Colby, St. Joseph's, but our main partner is University of New England. They're a learning collaborative for us, both at the Biddeford campus and also in Portland. And you can see some of the results. Again, that same structure: mindfulness, creative making, and then social sharing. And we got significant, improvements of 96% said, "Oh, it's good enough for me, and I think you should take it." 84% felt more connected to their peers. 79% felt less lonely. So here's where we're going to go next in Maine. We're expanding aging outside the lines. Again, that's just bringing in more community collaborators. If you work for an organization that serves older adults, there is on your tables, there's a glossy flyer that's printed on both sides. It has my picture on the back side, but it talks a little bit about what we do. But most importantly, it's got the QR code so you can find out about what we're up to. We're also eager to expand our campus work. Some would love to work with some of the colleges and universities that we have yet to build relationships with. So feel free to connect us to that. Everyone who's attended RSVP will be getting a follow-up email, and our contact information will be part of that. But now the most exciting thing we want to do in Maine is test out one of our new programs. So we have in development what I think is my favorite program so far that we've taken on. It's called Pets UnLonely. And the idea is to get people who have a relationship with a beloved animal to come together with other people who have relationships with beloved animals and share their stories about their animals. I think this will help us with a particularly challenging problem in Maine, because I spend a lot of time up here in West Bath, is that many of the men, particularly the older men I meet, really are not that excited about talking about their personal issues. I've got neighbors who could be dying of cancers, man, who would not tell you. But you get them talking about their dog, they will not stop. So we thought, okay, why don't we program for that? So it's Pets UnLonely, and it follows that same framework, some mindfulness and so on. But then we ask people to, and there are two types of workshops, by the way. There's if you still have your beloved animal with you, we have that workshop. It's called Pet Story, and you come together and you do some reactive art making, whether it's drawing or a short poem about your beloved animal, and then you share it and you make friends. That's kind of what it's for. Sadly, many people have lost their pet. So the second workshop is celebration of life for pets, because then people can come in a way, a sense of balance about it. They can remember the joy, the celebration, and it increases the likelihood to get another pet. Just won't surprise anyone. The science showing that having a pet is good for you is just overwhelming. Physical health, mental health. So, we think it's a good thing to have pets. And so if you have unresolved grief because of prior loss of a pet, and that's a barrier, maybe this can help. So that's Pet Stories. And so we are rolling it out. This is, for those of you who have I'll do this right now. Take out your cameras. This is a QR code that lets you, if you work or know an organization that may want to pilot our Pets UnLonely workshop, and more on that is in the other flyer we gave out. But don't look at the flyer now. Look at your phone, because you want to look at this QR code and sign up, because we actually have funding. Not huge amount of fundings, but we will be able to defer some of the costs of teaching artists and supplies and various things. We think this program can be a game changer, particularly for men. And just for people who don't know it, suicide rates are higher in men, particularly older men, like significantly higher. There is a separate loneliness crisis going on there. So we can get them to come and talk about their pets, fantastic. And we'll be sending this around. So if you can't make the QR code work, you'll be getting the information. So opportunities for immediate action. I think it's really to just do what we're doing here, expand awareness about loneliness and what the arts can do to connect, but also work to destigmatize it. This idea that loneliness is a signal and you're not at fault. I've had people come up afterwards who actually said that changed their willingness to even think about it. Because that's what stigma is. You just don't, it's so painful because you're ashamed, I'm lonely because of fill in the blank inadequacy, that if you give them another framing, it's a game changer, right? So that we can be doing that right now. I think we should be encouraging personal storytelling every chance we get. I'd like to do a shout out to Community Plate Maine. Carl Schatz is here. I met Community Plate a couple of years ago through a friend who knew I was interested in public health and loneliness, didn't know that I actually spent a lot of time in Maine. I went to one of their suppers. They do potlucks and storytelling. It's magical what it does in terms of inviting people. There's something about food. Maybe this goes back to the cave dwelling days. It just lets our defenses down. You're more open. You're more willing to tell stories. And the last thing we could be doing is engaging with opportunities to create and connect at every opportunity, to just embrace the arts as more than aesthetic pleasure, as delightful as that is, but really a channel for health and well-being. And I'll leave you with this quote from Pablo Picasso: "Any form of art is a form of power. Any form of art is a form of power. It has impact. It can affect change. It can not only move us, it can make us move. So please, do what you can to use the arts to make us move. A very, kind of blatant shout out. If you want to read my book, you can buy it here today. The very kind folks from Gulf of Maine Books are here. Gary Lawless, I see him in the corner. Gary, tables are outside. I think he'll be hanging around at least for another 20 minutes or so. I'm happy to sign any books that people want. It would be my pleasure to sign it. So thank you very much. Do we have time for questions? We have time for a few questions. I hope I haven't stunned you into silence here as you contemplate loneliness as a signal. Oh, and Lee has the microphone. We'll parallel play on this. Questions about loneliness or how the arts can connect. Yeah. Hang on. Thank you.
What is the data on loneliness before COVID compared to loneliness after COVID?
Great question. What's the data on loneliness before COVID till after it? The challenges were really terrible at measuring it. Here's why. And now I get to talk about what I didn't think I had time to put in a slide. There are different types of loneliness. And the typical measurements aren't sensitive to the different types. And I'll demystify it by just telling you what they are. The first is psychological loneliness. Do I have a friend? Do I have someone to tell my troubles to? The second is the loneliness of systematic exclusion, when you're actually excluded because of race, class, immigrant status, disability, and so on. And that's a trauma state. The problem there isn't that you don't know how to make friends or don't have opportunities. You feel excluded. The third type of loneliness is a kind of existential or spiritual loneliness where you're struggling to figure how do you fit into the bigger world. And this is what's troubling a lot of what we now know is the loneliest demographic, 18 to 28. They're just not sure where they fit in. Who are they? Do their lives have consequence? And so one of the challenges in knowing where we are in loneliness is I think we've seen a shift pre-COVID from loneliness type 1 to a growing amount of loneliness type 2 and 3, right? We're all kind of now edgy about our identity and saying who we are, so we don't want to get canceled or excluded or worse, have our home attacked. But then also with climate trauma, geopolitical instability, a lot of people, particularly young adults, I spend a lot of time with that as an educator, are just uncertain about the future. And they isolate as a part of that. They distract themselves with social media and they get to a different kind of loneliness. So we actually are pretty confident that loneliness is going up, not sadly because of data, but suicide rates are going up dramatically, and self-harm rates and drug overdose rates. Overdose deaths are lower, so that's a good statistic, but overdose events are higher. So all the more reason to be mobilizing the arts for that. Time for another question. Yeah.
Oh, ain't I lucky? So my question is more about arts are intergenerational. Are we connecting the youth with our older for loneliness to help both of them?
Can we have a round of applause for that great question? You're exactly right? If we think the two loneliest groups are older adults and young adults, let's bring them together. And it turns out that they're very effective intergenerational programs using the arts. Because if you remove the so-called parental layer, no one's afraid of, the kids aren't afraid of judgment. And the older adults feel they have a wisdom role that they feel honored. It's part of the serving other people. So what we're doing a lot of those programs actually in libraries. Because libraries are natural connecting hubs. So are art museums, where people feel they're like non-religious sacred spaces. And so we're combining programs there where we'll often start with one of our short films, and then it's like come for the film, stay for the art, and then bring together intergenerational groups. They've been incredibly active. We're working with Boston Public Library. Would love to do some of it up here in Maine because I think it's a natural, really, to bring together the generations. Thanks for asking that great question. Okay, that was my last question. That's very kind. I'm going to stick around. I'll sign books. I'll sign anything you want me to sign. That's good.